Good, good afternoon. You may have gotten a little bit of our behind the scenes there as we got prepared. Today we are hosting Business Espresso, your jolt of business acumen. Our hosts have extensive backgrounds in their respective fields of sales and marketing, accounting, risk mitigation, and wealth management, and law, of course, will be the focus of our show today. Their backgrounds all come together in a common goal to help small business owners thrive. Every other week, you can find us here on Zoom at 1 o'clock Mountain Time, and we'll be offering you a different topic presented by one of our experts to help you create, build, and optimize your business. Each presentation should give you one actionable step to help you walk away with something you can do today to help you get better at running your business, not being run by your business. Make sure to add us to your calendars. Before I introduce today's host, a little reminder, we do try to make this an interactive session. So if during the presentation you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box or into the chat. Don't keep them to yourself. And after the presentation, we'll open it up to questions. Without further ado, our hosts today. Today we are joined by John Gies, who, if his power doesn't go out, he will be here to ask questions. He is our business growth strategist from RAS Squared and your expert in scaling your sales and marketing. Mark Hurdle, the founding member of Tax Time CPAs. His expertise lies in accounting and tax strategy. Sam Saeed, an award-winning financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual, to guide us in risk mitigation and wealth management. And of course, our speaker today, Christina Gilbertson, owner of Gilbertson Law Office. She has extensive experience as a trial lawyer. Christina knows the importance of strong legal documentation, and her law firm is focused on helping small businesses protect what they've worked so hard to build. Christina's clients can let go of uncertainty of the cost of prohibitive nature of hourly billing and plan for the comprehensive legal services they need, billed by subscriptions and flat fees. Christina, take it away. I'm excited to learn about LLCs.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see, get this pulled up here. So yes, I work with clients, everything from forming through leading the business. And so one of the first questions that I'm often asked by clients is, what kind of entity do I need to be? Does it matter? And so today, as Colleen mentioned, we're going to talk about a few different entity types, but our focus is going to be on the limited liability company, or the LLC, as you will hear in just a moment. All right, I am a lawyer, so I do have to disclose that this is not intended to be legal advice. This is informational only. Your specific situation may change a recommendation or will be very specific to your specific needs. If you do have questions about your legal status, please feel free to reach out to me online. I'd be happy to talk to you there, but this is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be legal advice. So first question. Does your entity type really matter? Well, in a word, yes. So there's different types of business entities. You've got your sole proprietorships, you have partnerships, you have corporations, and you have limited liability companies. And each one of these can play a part in your business life structure potentially, or depending on your circumstances, may be a fairly safe bet. That said, one form of a business entity is an easy answer for me, that whenever I come across somebody who has this legal structure, my heart rate starts going a little bit, I start getting a little bit nervous for them. And that is sole proprietorships. Just no, that is not going to be a good legal structure for your business for a variety of reasons. It may be simple, but it's not going to be something that's going to protect you at all. So a little bit more, why don't you want to be a sole proprietor? Well, it's an informal business structure, as is a general partnership. So a sole proprietor is one person, a general partnership is two or more people, but they're both considered informal business structures that don't necessarily require any filing with the Secretary of State. The advantage is, like I said, it's easy to form and maintain because there's not a lot of paperwork, if any. And it's good for, if you're just starting off and it's low risk, low profit ideas, there's not a lot of worry that something could go wrong and come after you. But as you see, there's a lot more disadvantages there with a sole proprietorship or just a straight general liability or general partnership. There's no personal liability protection. That means You and your business are the exact same entity if something were to go wrong. So if somebody were to sue you, your personal assets are on the line. You don't want that. You always want to have some barrier to your personal assets. Sole proprietorships also have relatively limited growth potential. You're kind of stagnant. There's not a whole lot you can do as a sole proprietor. There are absolutely no tax benefits that I'm aware of. And of course, I would defer to Mike on that if there's something that I'm not aware of. But my understanding, no tax benefits, just being a sole proprietor. And, there's also some less credibility and branding issues. People want to know that you're a legit business, and having an LLC or some other recognized form of business can go a long way there. So what's the most common entity structure for most small to mid-sized businesses? Well, today we'll talk primarily about an S Corp and a limited liability company. The first thing I wanted to mention, though, is, oh gosh, too far. What is an S Corp? Just to clear the air and avoid some confusion out there, that's something that I know is often confused, is an S Corp in and of itself is not a separate legal entity. An S Corp is a taxation election. So when we're talking an S Corp versus a C Corp, we're talking about a corporation. C Corps have a lot more restrictions, and they're a little bit more of a complicated entity type. And for most small and mid-sized businesses, those extra hoops you have to jump through are probably not going to be necessary. If you are have your heart set on being a corporation and you want that Inc. in your name or that Corp in your name, then you can certainly do so. But we generally would say an S Corp is probably going to be your best bet. Again, these tax questions as to which to elect to be, that's going to be a question for your accountants, for the Mikes of the world, that they're the ones that are going to tell you, whether it makes sense for you to be a C Corp or an S Corp. But S Corps are somewhat limited in terms of the number of owners there can be. Again, most of our audience here are small and mid-sized businesses, so I don't think we're going to have a lot of people that have more than 100 shareholders. An S Corp is only able to be owned by United States citizens or residents. So if you have a foreign investor or a non-citizen investor or owner, you're not going to be able to benefit from the S Corp taxation structure. S Corps can only operate in the United States, whereas C Corps can operate anywhere. S Corps, you can only have one share of class, whereas a C Corp, you could have multiple share of stock classes, meaning with a C Corp, you could have voting classes, you could have non-voting classes, you can have preferred shares, common shares, whereas S Corp, it's all the exact same across the board. There are some internal formalities with both of them. Ownership transfer is going to be easier for an S Corp than it is for a C Corp. And as far as tax payments, profits are not taxed for the S Corp, but they are for a C Corp, because a C Corp really is a separate entity. They're both, the C Corp is, and I don't want to go too far down the tax line because I know just enough to be dangerous with that. So I will defer a bit the big picture stuff to Mike on that. But the C Corp taxation is a little bit different than if you were going to be taxed as an S Corp, and you just need to make sure you understand that. The formalities that I'm talking about are, if you're a corporation, whether an S Corp or a C Corp, you have to have board meetings on a regular basis. You need to provide notice to your stockholders of different things that are happening. And there's a lot of transparency and corporate hoops that you just have to jump through, and checking the box in case of an audit. But in the end, for most folks, an S Corp is just not going to be appropriate or necessary. The additional hoops you have to jump through as being a corporation when you're a smaller mid-sized business just doesn't justify the extra effort out there. So it's not a terrible choice if you do insist on being a corporation. Definitely have that conversation with your accountant to find out S Corp or C Corp taxation. But generally speaking, when I'm setting up companies for my clients and I'm talking with their accountants and talking about it, very rarely have I actually found that an actual corporation taxes as an S Corp is the way to go. Most of the times, if that's on the table, an LLC is going to be your best bet. So that tells us what is the best entity for your business. As if I haven't told you enough just yet, or beat you over the head with it quite enough, is going to be your LLC. And why is that? There's a lot of reasons for that. The LLC provides you with that personal liability protection. An LLC is a separate entity from you personally. So that means you have your personal assets over here, you have your business assets over here, and as long as you're not commingling them and paying for personal stuff out of your business account, paying for your business stuff out of your personal account, and you're just keeping them as separate entities, if someone were to file suit against your company, they're going to be limited to recover against the assets of the LLC. And that's a huge thing there. We've talked about some of the tax options, whether the general default taxation structure for an LLC. If you're a single member, you're going to be taxed like a sole proprietor. If you're a partnership, you're going to be taxed as a general partnership, but you always have that option to be taxed as an S Corp. Again, whether or not that makes sense for you because of the extra hoops you have to jump through in terms of having payroll and some other things that you have to have lined up, that's a question and a discussion for you to have with your accountant. And it's just going to depend from person to person. LLCs are pretty inexpensive to form. There's not a ton of paperwork. It's not terrible. It also makes it easy to form. Like I said, there's not a lot of paperwork here in Colorado. The required paperwork is nil. I always recommend that there be an operating agreement just as a best practice so that you understand how the business is supposed to be ran. And it's kind of like a manual for how your business is going to be run, but it's not required in the state of Colorado. Management flexibility is important. So an LLC can be managed by its members, which is the owners themselves, or a member manager where one of the many owners is selected to be the manager of the day-to-day operations, or the members can select an outside third party where it's just being managed by a manager. And so just depending on what makes sense for you and if there's other owners, how involved people want to be in the business, you have different options there. And then lastly, as I mentioned, having some credibility for your business can be key. You can name an LLC pretty much whatever you want it to be. It could be your name LLC if you really want to, but just having that LLC and people understand you are an actual entity and you're able to brand that, you're able to kind of get out there and do a little bit more in terms of marketing and brand recognition. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. Oh gosh. Oh, there we go. That was weird. So I've talked a little bit about being an actual S corporation, being an LLC, and being an LLC taxed as an S corp. And this spreadsheet just kind of is an overview of the benefits and pros and cons. Like I said, as long as you are being compliant with the corporate hoops and you're not commingling your funds, you can have equal legal protection across any of these, regardless of your tax selection as an LLC or if you're an S corp. Then it's all about the same. Pros, they're all pass-through entities. You don't have to worry about self-employment tax if you're an S corp or if you're taxed as an S corp. They're fairly easy to operate. If you are an S corp or if you have the S corp election, then you do need to be paying owners payroll and things like that. But the LLCs they're always going to be a little bit easier, whether you're an S corp or not, just because there aren't as many rigid requirements. Corporations are very closely, there's certain things that you have to do. And unless your accountant tells you that you really do need to be an actual corporation, make your life a little bit easier. Let's be an LLC. And that doesn't mean that once you choose to be an entity type, you're stuck with that forever. That's just not the case. You can always change your entity type at some point if it makes sense. If you're growing, or if you want to bring on foreign investors, then you need to get outside of the S corp, and maybe it makes sense to go be a C corporation tax structure, things like that. You can convert from one to another relatively easy. So don't feel like once you pick something, you're stuck with it forever. Businesses change, their needs change, the recommendations are going to change. And that's something that you need to make sure that you have a clear understanding and open relationship and dialogue with both your attorney and your tax professional to make sure they know where things currently stand, they know where you're trying to go, and then together they can create, the best plan to figure out what the right structure is going to be from both a legal and a tax perspective. So there's lots of different options out there. I know this was a really high level type of presentation today. But if you guys have any questions or anything, I just kind of wanted to do a real quick deep dive. Let's make sure and explain, why it is that I, from a legal perspective, working with a lot of short startups, why I find the LLC to fit in about 98% of the time for most clients. So with that, any questions that anybody has, I'd be happy to answer.
Some presentation, Christina. Looks like we don't have any questions in the feed at the moment. So I'm going to open it up to our panelists if you want to stop sharing so we can see everybody's faces.
Absolutely.
Nice and big. One of the nice takeaways I had was just that you can change your legal entity type. I think a lot of people think that they're stuck when that happens, when you choose at the beginning. So that's always a nice takeaway. See, John has his hand raised. Let's start with John. John, are you still with us? And do you have a question for Christina?
I do, but before I do, I saw that we have a question from one of our guests.
We do have one that popped up. Yay.
So go ahead and take that question. I'll hold on to mine.
Sure. So from David, we have, please elaborate on pass-through. And is that something you would like to chat? Or we can pass that on to Mike, as that's kind of a tax question.
I feel like Mike would probably say it a little bit more succinctly than I would. So if he doesn't mind, I'll pass it to him.
Sure.
Sure. The real quick basic understanding of pass-through income is that the only entity out of all those entities that pays its own tax is the C corporation. A pass-through entity means whatever your business makes, it doesn't pay any tax. It passes it through to you and you record it on your individual return and you pay the tax on your individual return.
Yeah. So that's kind of the basic there. And then, yep, we'll be posting the video in our Facebook group, and we have a new YouTube channel that will be going up onto as well, that I'll post that in our Facebook group. And I will repost the Facebook link down below so you don't have to scroll. Let's see. Can Kelly get unmuted to ask a question? Great question, Kelly. Let me see if I can unmute you.
He's unmuted.
Hi,
Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes.
Hi, this is actually Katie Wingland with Human Interest. I actually have a friend here with me who has a few questions. She's from New Zealand, but she lives in the state and she's starting a business. She has one, but she has some questions, so go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering, as a foreign-owned LLC, do you require to have any US citizen employees, or is there any special consideration regarding that?
So you have an LLC that was formed in New Zealand, I'm assuming, is that correct?
No, it was formed in the state of Colorado.
Oh, okay. And so, okay, so say your question again. I think I missed something.
What was that? Sorry?
Can you restate your question then? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was any special considerations for a foreign-owned LLC regarding, do you require American citizen employees, or is there no requirement for that?
I'm not aware of anything that you would be required to have a U.S. Citizen as an employee. You just would not be able to elect for the S corp taxation structure there. I think that you should be fine if you're the sole owner and sole employee of it. You should be just fine with that, as far as I've ever seen.
Sure. Also, just one more question, please.
Sure.
I will not be physically in the US for 181 days each year. I spoke with the IRS and they said that would mean that I wouldn't technically owe tax, but having an LLC, would that still mean that there would be tax owed to the US?
She is not a US citizen. She's trying to get her green card. Her company is owned. I mean, the LLC is created here, but she owns it and she's a New Zealand citizen.
That's more of a, I think that's going to be more of a tax question, not to pass it to Mike, but I'm just not sure on that one.
So there's one very basic answer to every single tax question. It depends. And it depends on, the date. It depends on how much income you've generated. It also depends on if there's a tax treaty between the two. So it gets complicated really quick. But in general, Wherever you earn money, that's where you should expect to be taxed on it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I might have to just, she's getting ready to leave right now for 181 days. But when she gets back, I will connect you guys with her to be able to have that further discussion. I think the thing is because she's going to have to hire American and pay taxes here, but her company's not here. She's not a U.S. citizen. She doesn't have citizenship yet. She's trying to get her visa, green card, to be able to be here more frequently. So she's going to need to create certain things and figure out how to hire somebody, but know what taxes she has to pay on her end because she'll have U.S. Employees.
Yep, that's a great question for a longer conversation.
Perfect. All right. Thank you guys so very much. This has been wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
So Christina, one of the questions that I get from a lot of my clients is, how long does it take to actually set up an LLC?
It's very fast. Colorado. There the first time, they've got videos and things that can walk you through it. Figure an hour maybe. It's not complicated at all.
Christina,
Yes,
I
sir.
have a number of colleagues that are saying you should always create an S corp for tax advantage. You can get great tax savings by being an S corp, and as I look at some of my clients, being an S corp and having the reporting requirements might be more work than the tax savings. Your thoughts?
So, absolutely. So, as I mentioned kind of at the top of the show, an S corp in and of itself isn't a separate entity. It's just the tax election. So if they're saying that they need to be like an actual corporation and taxed as an S corp, that's one thing. If they're an LLC and they just want to be taxed as an S corp, then it's going to be, as Mike said, it depends. It's going to talk about, you need to be at a certain revenue or profit level before it makes sense to jump through those extra hoops and do that extra paperwork and everything. But LLCs, even as taxed as S corp, don't have the same reporting requirements as a corporation would that's taxed as an S corp. So I think that's a misconception between a lot of folks, again, is thinking that the S corp in and of itself is its own entity, and it's not. It's just a tax election, and it gets very confusing from person to person. But it's going to be a question, again, most likely for your accountant to tell you and evaluate kind of where your revenue is looking to whether or not that S corp is going to justify itself.
Great, thank you.
Of course,
Absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What happens in the event that a business is an LLC and there's a sole member, but they run it's one and the same, they file it on the same tax return, and they're using their own social security number. At that point, is there any protection for the LLC if they're running it? So they should not be doing that.
Correct. The LLC should have its own tax identification number. And so that's the next step. You get it registered on the Secretary of State's website. I see that David asked how much it costs. It's $50 registration fee on the Secretary of State website. And then you pay an annual registration fee that is nominal. But once you get that, your articles of organization is what it's called that the Secretary of State will spit out for you. The next step is go over to the IRS website and get yourself an EIN. And then you should be having separate bank accounts with that bank and or with that EIN for the LLC, and then one for you personally with your own personal social security number. If you're using your own social security number for everything, then that LLC is basically it's non-existent. It needs to have its own separate identity in order to get the protections.
Yeah, but what if the tax individual is putting it on, your CPA is putting it on taxes? I know you had talked to Mike about this, but if they're putting it on their CPA is putting everything on one tax return, running it as like almost like a sole proprietor.
There's a couple of considerations there, and you may be speaking about two different types of taxation, which is definitely a conversation with more detail.
Okay.
And we have another question from David about, is there any benefit for a commission sales professional working for a corporation to register as an LLC?
I think that there's a couple of different things to be considering there. As far as it's definitely a longer conversation to figure out, what is the actual relationship between the person and the company that they're working for? Are they being paid as a W-2 employee, or is it more of an independent contractor relationship? If you're an independent contractor, then absolutely you need to be an LLC and being paid as an LLC as opposed to you individually. So you are a W-2 to be an LLC. From a legal perspective, I would say no, but from a tax perspective, I would have to defer because I don't know.
Awesome. Sam, I think we have time for a question from you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, there's some good questions fired today, so I was just keeping silent. One of the benefits of an LLC or being a business owner is increasing your IRA contributions via a SEP IRA, 58,000 this year as opposed to 57 last year, and as opposed to 6,000 if you're not a business entity. My question, Christina, is there any other benefits, tax benefits? I guess this defaults to Mike as well, but basically having an LLC as opposed to not having an LLC, any other benefits outside of the set IRA contributions and increasing those pre-tax savings?
Mike, I'll defer to you on that. Sorry.
The one real quick thing I say for all my clients is the LLC is a liability protection. You're doing it for the legal. The LLC can elect to be taxed like any one of those entities. It can be taxed like a sole proprietor, a partnership, a corporation, or an S corp. So again, you form the LLC so it's nice and clean, it's easy, and it gives you the legal protection. And that's really the essence. On the tax side, we can move things around with other elections behind the scenes for the taxes. But that's my take on it. It's the LLC is really the legal protection side.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is that, everything when we do goes hand in hand so much. We start with the legal and then we talk to the tax. And the more that we can talk together, the better we can serve our clients, is when we have those conversations together to ensure everyone is served well. Any cautionary tales, Christina, that you've seen where you wish you had gotten in there sooner to have that LLC set up?
Absolutely. So for me, if you're going to go into business with a partner, whether it's an LLC or you decide to form something else, I'll just stick to the LLC because it's easier. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time. I don't care if they're your best friend, if they've been your best friend. I don't care if it's your sister or somebody that's been in your life your entire, forever. Get agreements in place up front. Whether that, as far as for the business itself, have an operating agreement that talks about, when are distributions going to be made to the profits? When are you're going to be paying the members for their ownership? What's going to happen if you want to bring on another partner? What happens if one of the partners wants to leave? Getting those things out in the open, it doesn't have to be super complicated, but getting it out in the open from the get-go is going to save you time, money, effort, headache, all of the things. And also, if you have multiple owners, look at getting a buy-sell agreement. So that's going to talk about if you have two owners, one of them gets hit by a bus, what happens to that owner's share? If you haven't figured out what's going to happen with it then you're going to find yourself as the surviving owner. You might find yourself going into business with your former partner's family, who you may not be able to stay in the same room with without wanting to jump out a window. And so by having a fully funded buy-sell agreement, meaning a lot of times it's done with life insurance, use that money to buy out the deceased member's ownership so that the surviving owner doesn't have to come up with a bunch of money, and they're not forced into business with somebody they don't want to be in business with. But there's a lot of things you can do proactively while things are good, because you never know. A business divorce can be as messy as a familial divorce. And I'm so risk adverse. I'm such a proponent of just figure it out up front while everybody's still talking to each other. And then, emotions are going to run high at some point, and hopefully you won't ever need it. But trust me, if you ever need it and you don't have it, you're going to be kicking yourself. So save yourself the headache.
Absolutely. Pray for the best, plan for the worst kind of
Absolutely.
situation. Absolutely. Some great takeaways, some great discussions. Thanks for everyone who asked questions today. We have 1 minute left. This was perfect. So thank you so much, Christina. I love legal conversations. They go so hand in hand with what we do at Tax Time CPAs. And thank you to all of our attendees who asked questions. Kelly, thank you so much. You always ask great questions and have long, deep conversations that we can have with you about everything. I look forward to following up with you. And thank you so much. We look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks right here. We're going to be talking to Sam, and he is going to tell us all about retirement accounts, fringe benefits, and some common misconceptions that we have with those. So look forward to speaking to you all again in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for attending.